I'm in tech, the man replied simply, his voice calm but uninterested in conversation. Oliver chuckled, stretching his arms as if the very air around him belonged to him. Tech, huh? That's a broad term these days. Startups? Investments? Or just another coder hoping to make it big? The man took a sip of his water before answering. Something like that. Oliver smirked. Well, I know a thing or two about tech myself. Built a billion-dollar company from the ground up. Disruption. Innovation. You know how it is. It's not for everyone. Though, some people just aren't cut out for the real game. The man simply nodded, offering no further details. This only encouraged Oliver, who mistook silence for admiration. He continued, his voice carrying just a little louder, ensuring that the other first-class passengers could hear. It's all about vision. Really, you have to think 10 steps ahead. Most people don't get that. They're just cogs in the machine, doing what they're told. But real leaders? We make the rules. We don't just follow trends. We create them. The man nodded again, but this time there was a hint of amusement in his expression. He shifted slightly in his seat, finally tilting his head just enough for Oliver to catch a proper glimpse of his face. Oliver froze mid-sentence, his breath catching in his throat. The man's cap had subtly lifted just enough for the cabin's soft lighting to reveal his unmistakable features. It was Elon Musk. The realization hit Oliver like a lightning bolt. He had just spent the last 10 minutes lecturing Elon Musk, arguably the most influential tech entrepreneur of the century, about vision, disruption, and innovation as if he were schooling some clueless amateur. His mouth went dry. His mind scrambled for a way to backpedal. But there was no easy escape from this. Elon finally spoke, his voice still casual, but now tinged with unmistakable amusement. Sounds like you've got it all figured out. Oliver forced a laugh, his confidence wavering. I mean, of course. I admire what you've done. Tesla, SpaceX, all of it. Huge fan. Just, you know, every industry has different perspectives on disruption. Elon leaned back in his seat, nodding thoughtfully. Yeah, I guess you're right. Though, it's funny. Most of my teams focus less on making the rules and more on solving real problems. Oliver swallowed hard. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated. The first-class cabin had gone noticeably quieter. The flight attendants, the other passengers, many of whom had likely recognized Musk from the beginning, were now pretending very hard not to be listening. But Oliver knew they were. He could feel the weight of the collective silence pressing in. Elon took another sip of water before continuing. $1 billion valuation. Huh, that's impressive. What's your company working on? Oliver hesitated. We. It's a data optimization platform. AI-driven analytics. Mainly. Helps businesses make smarter decisions. Elon raised an eyebrow. AI-driven analytics. Sounds useful. So, what makes it unique? Oliver's mind was spinning. He had rehearsed this pitch 1,000 times in front of investors, but suddenly, explaining it to Elon Musk felt like a high schooler trying to impress Einstein with a science fair project. Well, we use a proprietary algorithm to synthesize large data sets more efficiently than traditional methods. Elon gave a slow nod, expression unreadable. Interesting. Oliver forced a weak smile. Yeah, it's all about efficiency. Really. The silence stretched. Then Elon, still entirely unfazed, reached for his phone and tapped the screen a few times. After a moment, he glanced back at Oliver. Seems like your company raised Series C funding 6 months ago, right? But I noticed something interesting. Your churn rate increased by 18% last quarter. You guys running into retention issues? Oliver blinked, stunned. How had he? Elon continued, his voice calm but cutting. I mean, I get it. Scaling's tough. AI models are great. But if the product doesn't deliver sustained value, customers won't stick around. And from what I can see, your competition is catching up fast. How are you differentiating beyond just optimization claims? Oliver had no answer. His throat felt like sandpaper. The power dynamic had shifted so fast he could barely process it. Just minutes ago, He had been the one dominating the conversation. Now, he was completely exposed. Before he could stammer out a weak response, Elon gave him an easy smile. Anyway, something to think about. And just like that, he turned back to his water and relaxed into his seat, as if the conversation had been nothing more than idle chatter. Oliver, on the other hand, sat stiffly, his brain still scrambling to recover. He had just been publicly dismantled, effortlessly, by the very man he had arrogantly assumed was beneath his notice. The rest of the flight was excruciating. Oliver barely spoke for the remaining hours. His fingers hovered over his laptop, but for the first time in years, he had nothing to post. No grand declarations. No self-congratulatory tweets. He had spent years branding himself as a visionary, a leader, an innovator. And yet, in a matter of minutes, the Elon Musk had shown him exactly how little he really knew. As the plane touched down in Tokyo, Oliver hesitated before standing. Elon was already gathering his things, moving with the same unbothered ease he had maintained throughout the flight. Just before stepping off the plane, Oliver swallowed his pride and turned to him. "Mr. Musk," he said quietly. Elon looked up. "Thanks for the perspective." Elon gave a knowing smile. "No problem. Good luck." And with that, he was gone. Oliver stood there for a long moment, watching as the billionaire disappeared into the crowd. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Lesson learned. Some people disrupt industries. Others just tweet about it. Oliver smirked, sensing an opportunity to assert his dominance in the conversation. "Not exactly. That's a vague answer. Come on. What do you actually do?" The man in 2B took a slow sip of his water before replying. "I build things." Oliver let out a short laugh. "Oh, so you're a builder now? What kind of things? Apps? Websites? AI that writes emails so people can pretend they're working?" The man chuckled, setting his water bottle down. "Something like that." Oliver shook his head. "See, that's the problem with the tech world these days. Too many people thinking they're innovators when all they're doing is repackaging old ideas. Real visionaries don't just follow trends, they create them." The man nodded slightly, but Oliver could tell he still wasn't engaging the way he wanted. He wanted a debate, an argument, something to show off in front of the other first-class passengers. "You ever meet Musk?" Oliver asked suddenly, eyes narrowing. "Because I have. Total showman. Talks big. Makes promises. But half the time, his ideas never even make it past the concept stage. People worship the guy. But honestly, he's overrated." The man in 2B finally turned fully toward Oliver. The angle of the cabin lighting revealed just enough of his face under the cap for Oliver's smirk to falter slightly. "Overrated. Huh?" The man mused. His voice was still calm, but now there was a distinct edge to it. "And what exactly have you built?" Oliver scoffed. "Like I said, billion-dollar startup. AI-driven data analytics. We've got some of the biggest clients in finance and e-commerce using our platform. Our last valuation was over $1 billion, and we're just getting started." The man tilted his head. "Impressive. And you're profitable?" Oliver shifted slightly in his seat. "Well, you know how it is. Scaling is the priority. Profitability comes later. Investors understand that." The man nodded again, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward Oliver. Oliver's stomach dropped. On the screen was his company's latest financial report, one that had been released just days ago. The one that showed that despite their billion-dollar valuation, they were hemorrhaging money and struggling with retention. The man studied Oliver's face as realization dawned. "Your churn rate jumped 18% last quarter," he noted casually. "That's not great." Oliver swallowed hard, his earlier bravado starting to crack. "How do you?" The man took off his cap, revealing his full face for the first time. The cabin lighting now made his features unmistakable. Oliver's heart sank. Elon Musk. The silence in first class was deafening. The passengers who had been subtly listening in were now fully locked onto the scene, eyes wide with recognition. Even the flight attendants had momentarily paused their service. Oliver's face burned with embarrassment. Elon let the moment stretch, then finally broke the silence. "So," he said, his tone light but undeniably sharp. Am I still just a PR stunt? Oliver struggled for words. His mouth opened, then closed. His confidence, so bulletproof just moments ago, was completely shattered. Elon took another sip of water and leaned back in his seat. I get it, he continued. Tech's a competitive space. And yeah, I talk about big ideas. But here's the thing. Ideas don't mean anything unless you build something real. Oliver could only nod, barely able to meet Musk's gaze. And as for failure, Elon added, you might want to look into how many of those exploding rockets helped us land reusable boosters. Because last I checked, SpaceX is sending astronauts to space. While your company, he gestured toward the phone screen still in his hand, seems to be having a bit of a retention problem. Oliver exhaled sharply, feeling like he had just been flattened by one of SpaceX's rocket launches. Elon smirked. Something to think about. And with that, he put his cap back on and returned to scrolling on his phone, as if nothing had happened. Oliver, on the other hand, spent the rest of the flight staring blankly at his untouched glass of champagne, the weight of humiliation sinking in. By the time the plane landed in Tokyo, he had made exactly 0 tweets. Before stepping off the plane, Oliver hesitated, then turned back to Elon. He cleared his throat. Mr. Musk, he said quietly. Elon looked up. Thanks for the perspective. Elon smiled, offering a small nod. No problem. Good luck. And with that, he was gone. Oliver stood there for a long moment before finally making his way toward the exit. Lesson learned. Some people actually build the future. Others just talk about it. Began settling in for the long flight. Oliver's curiosity reached its peak. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not in first class. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. All right, I have to ask, who exactly are you? The man in 2B paused mid-bite, then wiped his mouth with a napkin before finally looking up. His cap still cast a slight shadow over his face, but in the dim lighting, Oliver could make out his sharp features, the piercing gaze, and the unmistakable air of someone important. The realization hit like a gut punch. Oliver blinked, his mind racing. No, no way. A single name formed in his head, but he dismissed it as impossible until the man gave a small, knowing smile, and then it clicked. Oliver's throat went dry. His earlier confidence crumbled in an instant. The man in 2B, the one he had spent the last hour mocking, was none other than Elon Musk. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. The passengers around them were either dozing off or lost in their own screens, oblivious to the scene unfolding in seat 2A. Oliver swallowed hard, his mind scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. He had just spent an entire flight trashing the most influential entrepreneur of his generation to his face. Musk studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a calmness that sent a fresh wave of embarrassment through Oliver, he spoke. You know, Musk said, adjusting his cap slightly, I've always believed that people show you who they really are when they think you're nobody. Oliver felt his stomach drop. He opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time in his life, words failed him. Musk continued, his voice measured but firm. I get it. Criticism comes with the job. Some of it's fair. Some of it isn't. But the thing about building the future is, you don't do it by tearing other people down. You do it by doing something that matters. Oliver exhaled sharply, feeling like the entire cabin had suddenly closed in on him. Musk leaned back in his seat, his expression relaxed but his eyes still holding that quiet intensity. It's easy to throw opinions around, he said. Much harder to build something real. The words stung more than any direct insult could have. Oliver shifted in his seat, suddenly feeling unbearably warm under the dim cabin lights. He had spent the entire flight puffing up his own achievements, bragging about his company's valuation, belittling someone he had assumed was just another unimportant businessman. Now, the power dynamic had completely shifted. He had tried to make a spectacle out of Musk. Instead, he had made a fool of himself. The rest of the flight passed in excruciating silence. Oliver didn't touch his untouched steak. His usual instinct to dominate a conversation had been completely extinguished. Musk, on the other hand, appeared completely at ease, returning to his phone as if nothing had happened. When the plane finally touched down in Tokyo, Oliver hesitated. He wanted to say something, anything, to undo the damage. But what could he possibly say? As passengers began gathering their belongings, Musk turned to him one last time. "Good luck with your company," he said, standing up and slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Maybe I'll see you at the top." And with that, he walked away. Oliver remained frozen in his seat, watching Musk disappear into the terminal. Lesson learned. There's a difference between talking about innovation and actually creating it. And from now on, Oliver knew one thing for certain. He would think twice before assuming he knew everything, especially about the man sitting next to him. For the first time in his life, Oliver Bennett was at a complete loss for words. He had spent hours belittling the man sitting next to him, mocking his achievements, dismissing his innovations. And now he was sitting next to Elon Musk. The realization hit him like a freight train. Every arrogant remark, every smug laugh, every attempt to make himself seem superior, it had all been directed at the one man in the tech world who had nothing to prove to him. A few passengers nearby, who had clearly been following the conversation, exchanged amused glances. Some smirked behind their hands, while others gave Musk subtle nods of acknowledgement. The flight attendant, who had inadvertently dropped the bombshell, quickly stepped away, though not before Oliver caught the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Desperate to salvage whatever dignity he had left, Oliver cleared his throat and forced a nervous chuckle. I didn't mean anything by what I said earlier. You know, just talking." He waved a hand in the air, as if brushing off hours of condescension and insults. "You can't take these things personally." Musk tilted his head slightly, studying Oliver with an expression that was impossible to read. Then, with a small, almost knowing smile, he said, "Don't worry, I don't." And that was it. No anger, no lecture, no smug comeback, just a calm, measured response that somehow made Oliver feel even worse. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Oliver fidgeted in his seat, his once relaxed posture now stiff with discomfort. He reached for his glass, downing the last of his champagne in one desperate gulp. But the bitterness in his throat had nothing to do with the drink. For the remainder of the flight, Musk didn't acknowledge Oliver again. He simply returned to his book, his phone, his thoughts, completely unbothered. Meanwhile, Oliver sat there, agonizing over what had just happened. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the smartest guy in the room. And worse, he had just been humbled in the most effortless way possible. By the time the plane landed in Tokyo, Oliver was practically crawling out of his own skin. He wanted off this flight, away from this moment, away from his own embarrassment. But just as he reached for his bag, Musk finally turned back to him. "Good luck with your company," he said, his voice casual but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Maybe I'll see you at the top." And with that, he stood, slung his bag over his shoulder, and walked off the plane, disappearing into the bustling Tokyo terminal. Oliver remained frozen in his seat, staring at the empty space Musk had just occupied. "Maybe I'll see you at the top." It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't sarcasm. It was almost a challenge. As Oliver sat there, letting the words sink in, something shifted inside him. He had spent years convincing himself he was already at the top. But sitting next to someone who had actually built something that changed the world had just exposed how small his own accomplishments really were. For the first time in a long time, he realized something painful but necessary. He had a lot more to learn. With quiet deference, offering refills or checking on his comfort. But Elon hardly seemed to notice. He was at ease, completely unaffected by the tension that had left Oliver sitting stiffly in his seat, trapped in his own thoughts. For the first time in a long time, Oliver had nothing to say. The rest of the flight was a humbling experience for him. No more grandstanding, no more smug quips, just silence as he processed what had just happened. He had spent the last few hours tearing apart the work of a man who had redefined multiple industries, someone whose ideas had literally changed the trajectory of humanity. And he had done it with such casual arrogance, completely unaware of who he was sitting next to. Oliver had always prided himself on being the smartest guy in the room. But today, he had been reminded there was always someone smarter. Someone who had actually done the things others only talked about. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, signaling the final approach. Passengers stirred, stretching and gathering their belongings. Oliver felt a lump of nerves form in his throat. Should he say something? Apologize? Attempt to salvage his pride? Before he could decide, Elon turned toward him, his expression unreadable. "Good luck with your company," Elon said, his voice even and composed. "Maybe I'll see you at the top." And with that, he stood, grabbed his bag, and walked off the plane, disappearing into the terminal as if nothing had happened. Oliver remained frozen in his seat, replaying the words over and over in his mind. "Maybe I'll see you at the top." It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't condescending. It was a challenge. As Oliver sat there, staring at the empty seat where Elon Musk had just been, a realization hit him. For all of his success, his confidence, and his bravado, he wasn't anywhere near the top. Not yet. For the first time in years, he felt the fire again. Not the fire of competition or ego, but the fire to actually do something that mattered. And all it had taken was one conversation. The quiet professionalism of the flight attendants, their subtle gestures of deference toward the man he had mocked, now made perfect sense to Oliver. The weight of the moment settled on his chest like a heavy stone. This wasn't just about being caught in a moment of arrogance. It was about realizing how little he truly understood about the people and ideas he so casually dismissed. As the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers drifted off to sleep, Oliver sat in silence, reflecting on everything that had transpired. He had spent the past few hours tearing down a man who had redefined multiple industries, someone whose work had literally shaped the future. And he had done it with a smug sense of superiority, completely unaware of who he was sitting next to. After what felt like an eternity, Oliver hesitated before leaning slightly toward his seatmate. His voice was lower now, stripped of arrogance and bravado. "Hey, Mr. Musk," he whispered cautiously. Elon looked up from his book, his expression neutral but attentive. Oliver swallowed, forcing the words out. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I was out of line." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head at himself. "It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I can't imagine the weight of doing what you do." For a brief moment, there was silence. Then Elon studied him, his sharp gaze unreadable. Finally, he nodded slightly. "Apology accepted," he said simply. Oliver felt a flicker of relief, but Elon wasn't finished. "It's not easy," Elon continued, his voice calm but firm. "But that's the nature of progress. You're always going to face resistance, especially from people who don't see the full picture." He tilted his head slightly. "The key is to keep moving forward." Oliver nodded, his throat suddenly tight. He had nothing clever to say, no quip or retort. For the first time in a long time, he simply listened. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the quiet cabin stirred to life. Passengers adjusted their seats, gathered their belongings, and prepared for landing. Oliver turned toward the window, watching as the city lights grew brighter beneath them. For the first time, he truly thought about the courage it took to be a visionary, to face relentless criticism while chasing something bigger than oneself. He had always been quick to judge, eager to sound like the smartest man in the room. But now, all he could think about was how easy it was to tear things down and how incredibly difficult it was to build something that mattered. As they disembarked, Elon turned to Oliver one last time. "Good luck with your work," he said, offering a small smile. "I hope it's something that makes a difference." Then, just like that, he was gone, whisked away by discreet airport personnel, moving toward his next venture, his next challenge, his next impossible goal. Oliver stood frozen in place, watching until Elon disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, humility. And he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't go back to being the man he was when he boarded that plane. Lesson for life: the power of perspective. This story is a reminder that humility and understanding are far more valuable than arrogance and quick judgment. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but real impact comes from creating, innovating, and learning. Before dismissing someone's work or belittling their efforts, ask yourself, do I truly understand what they've done? More importantly, am I doing anything meaningful myself? True wisdom isn't about proving how much you know. It's about being open to learning from those who have built something greater than themselves. Stay curious, stay humble, and always strive to make a difference.